And he was the best looking guy. He had very bright blue eyes and lovely features and a very deeply cleft chin. And he was very sweet and nice, too. I met him on the overnight train going to camp in 1940, I guess. And I was carrying a loving cup with me, which was a cup called the Character Cup, which I had won the previous year, being a person of great character. And he was standing at the train and made some comment about it, humorous. And that's how I met him. And then I saw him at these dances. And he was a wonderful, wonderful dancer, too. And knew all the popular songs. So when we got back from camp, we started dating. But unbeknownst to him, I had a separate life entirely with other boys in the radical movement. He was my camp-type date, and he used to take me to places that you've never heard about, but where the big swing bands were playing, Benny Goodman and Artie Shaw and Glenn Miller, and we would go out with other people from Ragged Lake and have these very conventional dates, dancing and eating mediocre food, but very expensive. And my life in the radical movement was with boys who would take me for a walk as a date. But we became very serious in his mind. And after that, he began saying that we should get married. And I really didn't want to, but then my father stepped in and he said, I don't want you running off and marrying this guy. Well, that was the signal that was what I wanted to do. So we ran off to Elkton, Maryland. His older brother, Bobby, was at medical school at Johns Hopkins. And he was dating my best friend, who was the heiress of a great Philadelphia fortune. And they put us up, and they came with us when we ran off to Elkton, which was called the marriage capital of the world, because there was no waiting period you could get. We were married by somebody who advertised with a neon sign outside of his place, the marrying minister. We got married in 1941, and the war didn't come until December 7th. So, and he worked in a defense factory. He had dropped out of college after we got married so that he could earn a living, and he got a job in a defense factory, which got him originally a deferment, but then, he was the perfect age. He was 21. They could replace him at the factory with a woman. So he was drafted, and almost immediately, maybe 3 months later, was sent overseas. First to England, where my parents sent him with letters. We had English cousins who had escaped the Holocaust and who had settled in England. And they took him in and they treated him like a king. They were very wealthy. Then he was sent to France. And then I just was not into this marriage. I started having affairs with others, and he heard about it, and when he came back...
How did he hear about it?
Some of the people that I was involved with were people who were close to his older sister's husband, who was a refugee German composer and music critic. And I got into that circle. And all of that information got back from him to his older sister, to her. And he wrote to me and said he wanted a divorce. And I said, okay, and I wrote back, said, okay. The only decent thing that I did on Elmer's advice, I wouldn't have thought of it otherwise, was to say to him, let's stay married until you come home, and in that way I will get your GI's wife's allotment, which was a couple $100 a month, and I'll deposit that in an account for you, and when you get home, you can get it, whereas if we get divorced now, you won't get anything. And he agreed to that, and I did that, and when he came home in 1945, there was something like $3,000 there, which was, then it was decided that we would get an annulment because you couldn't get a divorce in New York. Unless you were caught in adultery. So we got an annulment. The ground was that he refused to go through a religious ceremony with me, which was, ridiculous. And so we got an annulment. I never saw him again. Several years later, I don't remember where I was working, in some do-good organization, and I went to some sort of conference, and I met this young woman, and we looked at each other, and I said to her, I know you, don't I? She's a very pretty woman. And she said, yes, I used to be your sister-in-law. And we spent the afternoon together. She was very nice. She said, I always liked you, even though you were villainous in my family. And she told me at that time that Steve had remarried. He had married a young woman whose family ran a chain of retail stores in Connecticut or New Jersey or someplace like that, and he had been taken in the business, and that they were very happy together, and that they had children together, and their business was successful, and that made me feel somewhat less guilty.